The Marketing Legends video series is made possible through the generous support of the Chef Foundation. The Chef Foundation is a not-for-profit organization whose mission is to develop and recognize scholars and scholarship in marketing globally and further the development of marketing thought.
Welcome to the American Marketing Association's Marketing Legends interview series. I'm Kay Lemon, the Accenture Professor of Marketing at Boston College and Executive Director of the Marketing Science Institute. I'll serve as today's host. Since 1937, the AMA has served as a global leader in marketing knowledge. Today, the AMA strives to be the most relevant force and voice influencing marketing around the world, to be an essential community for marketers. The Marketing Legends program is designed to honor exceptional marketing people within that community and create a repository of educational content to inspire students, scholars, and managers. Today I'm speaking with Russ Weiner. Thank you, Russ, for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Russ is the William Joyce Professor of Marketing at the Stern School of Business, New York University. He's authored over 70 papers and 4 books in marketing on a variety of topics, including consumer choice, marketing research methodology, marketing planning, advertising, and pricing. Professor Weiner served 2 terms as the editor of AMA's Journal of Marketing Research and is a past executive director of the Marketing Science Institute. He's a founding fellow of the Informed Society for Marketing Science, as well as the 2011 recipient of the AMA Irwin McGraw-Hill Distinguished Marketing Educator Award. In 2015, Professor Weiner was named an inaugural AMA Fellow. He received a BA in Economics from Union College and an MS and PhD in Industrial Administration from Carnegie Mellon University. So Russ, I've just briefly summarized your background. Please give us a snapshot of your early life and tell us how you ended up studying marketing and ended up at New York University.
Well, it's interesting. I grew up in Springfield, Massachusetts, and neither of my parents graduated from college, so I was the first, and I'm the oldest son, so I was the first to graduate from college in my family. I didn't really know I was interested in studying marketing. I was fortunate to have a couple of great undergraduate advisors at Union who directed me to Carnegie Mellon. So I got to Carnegie Mellon, and at Carnegie Mellon you didn't really need to declare what you were interested in, other than you were vaguely interested in business. So I got there and I was assigned 2 advisors, a finance advisor and a guy named Rick Stalin, who was just starting out his career, relatively young guy. And I liked finance, took some finance classes, and then I became a grader, a TA for Rick in his core marketing course for the Carnegie MBA, is what we call MBAs today. And I just enjoyed it. He used Kotler's textbook, so I'm one of Phil Kotler's disciples, I guess, at an early age. And I just like marketing, and took some doctoral seminars, and at that time a couple of books had just come out, including Kotler's Marketing Models book and a book by Morrison, Montgomery, and Massey on stochastic models of buyer behavior, and Jag Sheth had an edited volume on quantitative models of buyer behavior. And I saw it was a nice blend of my sort of math background and interest in human behavior, and so I decided to study marketing once I got there. So there's no marketing in my background anywhere other than I sort of fell into it in graduate school. I didn't know I didn't have to apply to a marketing program, just found out there.
Wow, the world would have been a very different place if you'd liked finance more than marketing, I guess.
Well, the other thing was I was kind of strategic. There were a number of doctoral students who were interested in finance, and there weren't any in marketing. So I figured if I was the only marketing student, my chances of getting kicked out of the program were much lower. So I decided to go into marketing. That was another reason to go into marketing, but obviously not the most important.
Wow. So was there a pivotal moment or a key person in your career? And how did this kind of influence your future career decisions? So clearly Rick had a significant influence.
Well, Rick had a significant influence, obviously. At Carnegie, there weren't too many marketing faculty members. There was basically Rick. There was another marketing professor named Dennis Gensch, who had done a lot of work in media planning at the time. And another guy who was influential, though, was Andy Mitchell, who was at Carnegie at the time, and he was on my thesis committee, and Andy wound up going to the University of Toronto. And Andy was influential as well, I would say, that Andy and Rick really helped me out a lot. And I think they were influential when I was in graduate school. Later in my career, it was, a few other people were as well. But right at that point where I was choosing marketing, I would say, Rick and Andy were very influential.
And if you look at your career trajectory, right? You're in New York, you go to Carnegie Mellon, and then you go to Columbia, and then you take a trek out to California, and then back to the East Coast. Do you recommend that? Is that a good trajectory, or are there any kind of key points that really make that work?
Things happen for different reasons. I mean, I think I was extremely fortunate to get my first job at Columbia. I think when I was on the job market, unlike today where there are a lot of business schools and a lot of jobs, fortunately, in marketing, I was on the market in 1975 and there weren't that many jobs. If you had a dozen interviews at the AMA, it was extremely good. And so I was fortunate. I actually remember very vividly, it was in December and I was kind of ill at the time. I was home sick in Pittsburgh and I got a call from Don Lehman. And he asked me if I would be interested in coming to Columbia, and I didn't hesitate at all. My joke with Don is that it wasn't Don that I went to Columbia for, it was for another marketing faculty member named Neil Beckwith, who at the time was doing some good stuff using econometric methods, which I was interested in. So I got to Columbia in January of 1977. Neil resigned from Columbia in December 1976, so he wasn't there at all. And then really the other person influential in my career is Don. I mean, Don and I just hit it off on a number of levels. He was also a Union College graduate, and we both have the same kind of outlook on life and on research in terms of not being terribly dogmatic, but being interested in the problem. And so I would say, it was really kind of Rick and Don that were influencers, but, at some point, I felt that I had gotten about as much out of Columbia as I could, between Columbia and Berkeley, I was at Vanderbilt.
I forgot about that.
Yeah, so I was in Nashville, and again, fortunate to have some great colleagues there. Al Shocker, who unfortunately passed away last year, and then I got a call from Berkeley that they were looking for a new head of the area, and who wouldn't want to live in the Bay Area, right? Fortunately, we met there, right? And had some great doctoral students there. And then ultimately, we came back to the East Coast for family reasons, and NYU was a great place. So, I've been at 4 schools. I think maybe that's greater than average. Some people stay at the same place forever. Some people change places. I've enjoyed the changes. I enjoyed living on the West Coast. Enjoy living in New York. Wish I could split my time between them, but it's hard to do.
Yeah, that's kind of hard to do.
But never look back, so I've enjoyed all the places I've been.
I was thinking, one of the things that I find really fascinating looking at your research career is somehow you always manage to be above or separate from the, are you purely quantitative or are you purely behavioral? And I think it's such a wonderful thing to kind of say, okay, you go to marketing science, you go to ACR, right? How did you do that? Did that just come naturally to you, or did you kind of say, okay, I'm not going to just be in one of these 2 camps, if you will, in terms of research?
Well, I think it's a good question. I think my background is more statistics and quantitative and econometrics, but I was still always interested in consumer behavior, and I think really where that started is kind of interesting. There was an economist at Carnegie named Bob Lucas, who eventually wound up winning the Nobel Prize, and he was the head of the doctoral program when I was there. So one of my proudest moments is that I wheedled an extra $100 out of Bob Lucas, who was, won the Nobel Prize eventually. And Bob was interested. He won the Nobel Prize for his rational expectations. And not going to go into that here, but I started thinking about it after I left Carnegie. I didn't use that in my dissertation. But I started thinking about how consumers form expectations of prices, for example. And that's kind of a behavioral phenomenon. And so I started to blend some behavioral aspects into choice models. And that resulted in my, probably my best known paper, the reference price paper in JCR in '86. And And after that, I really tried to continue to do that. And I think over my career, I've tried to be an advocate of eliminating sort of this three-group model we have of marketing. For some people, it's only two. It's you're either consumer behavior or you're marketing science. Some people say there's a third strategy. Whether it's two or three, it seems like you're always trying to be compartmentalized in marketing. And when I was JMR editor, and I would talk at schools, and later than other talks I would give, I tried to show that I was interdisciplinary as possible. I don't have true psychology credentials. Okay, I'm not a psychologist, but I tried to bring behavioral phenomena into choice models, and I think that's what I tried to do, and I think that's still a philosophy that I espouse, trying to break down these, I won't call them discipline barriers, because they're not really, they are partially disciplined, but I think our field is too small to have these artificial barriers, but they exist, and I've tried to break them down, and so.
So when you think about your ability, and I'd say you've been really successful in breaking down those barriers across kind of these different discipline areas, did that influence at all your editorship when you were editor of JMR, or your time as AMA Vice President of Publications?
Well, in fact, when I was JMR editor, I wrote an invited piece for the Journal of the Academy of Marketing Science on external versus internal validity. And it relates to this because I always felt that marketing science people have to be, are empirical by and large, okay? And I think that we're really good on external validity, but we're weak often on internal validity. Where the converse is true for consumer behavior people. Often they stop at experiments and don't try to test any of their theories, using empirical data. So this was before I was JMR editor, but Itamar Simonson and I wrote a paper, JMR, around 1992. Itamar and I were colleagues at Berkeley, and before he moved to Stanford. And he had written a paper for JMR on variety seeking. And I said, some of those things that you do there, we could probably test them with scanner panel data. So we did. I thought of a way of testing some of those behavioral theories with scanner panel data. And so we had a paper where we had tested some of his behavioral theories with scanner panel data. That gave us some ideas about new experiments to run. And so it was a paper with both empirical work and experimental work. And so that kind of, flavored my outlook going forward for a long time. And as JMR editor, I would always push authors of experimental work to at least give, if possible, maybe anecdotal data or some kind of empirical data, sort of on the external validity side, and to try to get more triangulation of what they were finding. And when I would do some seminars, doctoral seminars, sometimes what I would do is assign a marketing science paper and then say, now how would you design an experiment, all right, to test what they found empirically using some secondary data. And I would assign a JCR paper and say, now what kind of secondary data could you collect to provide some external validity to what they found. So I wrote this paper in JAMS, and so when I was on the stump, talking about JMR, I would talk about these kinds of things, and I gave some highlights of a few papers that I thought did a nice job doing that, and I've felt for a long time that the field needs to really more strongly consider, combining disciplinary approaches because there's just way too much insular thinking and silos in the field. For a small field, we're actually small. It's not like we're the American Psychological Society, with thousands of members. Right. I mean, we do have thousands, but only a couple thousand, I think, academic members. Yeah. And they need like 5 hotels for a conference. We can get by with 1. So it's really ridiculous that we do have these barriers, given we're a small field. But it's strange, When I go to an ACR, I can't tell you how many questions I get about, what are you doing here? Why are you here? Right. And that's sad in a lot of ways.
Because you say, because I do consumer research.
And that's what I do. I've gotten some good ideas going to ACR, and hopefully some behavioral people have gotten some ideas coming to marketing science conferences.
Well, another one of those bridges that you have successfully crossed and a bridge that you have been is as executive director of the Marketing Science Institute. And as one of your former students, I'm honored to be following in your footsteps, serving in that role right now. What do you see as the value of bringing scholars and business leaders together?
Well, I think, first of all, it was a privilege to be the executive director, not only because it's the world's best institution for doing just that, bringing academics and practitioners together, but if you look at the list of people who have been executive directors, it's kind of like a who's who, of marketing scholars. So it's great to be a member of that, and I'm certainly proud of you in being a member of that list. I think that we're fortunate at MSI that we are able to get practitioners who are, I used to call them closet academics, the ones that are heavily involved with MSI, I think wanted to be academics. They had the talent to do it, but they just went into a different direction after they went to graduate school. To tell you the truth, I think that we as academics have a lot more to learn from the practitioners than they do from us. And I've always learned something from practitioner talks, in terms of, and not just for classroom, but the kinds of issues that they deal with are just so different from ours. And the pressure that they have, because the work that they do, they have to make a business case for everything, right? They have to achieve business results. We can sit on a paper for a couple of years, right? And it's not a big deal. They have to provide results in every quarter. And I really, a lot of admiration for the business people that take the time, be involved with MSI, and really contribute a lot to our knowledge. And I think today what I've seen the balance shift in terms of who I think is contributing more to general marketing knowledge. I think the first half of my career, I thought that academics really had the edge. I think that we had the smartest people. We were still kind of data poor, but the data that practitioners had wasn't that great either, okay? So I always thought that we were ahead of the curve. I think the last 5 years or so, including the recent conference held at NYU on advertising, which you hosted, really has shown me that I think the balance has shifted towards practitioners, because I think the sophistication of the work that they're doing, plus the data that they have, it leads me to believe that they're starting to have the edge in terms of developing ideas, because I think a lot of the good people now are being hired by the Googles and the Facebooks and companies like that. They're not just going into academia. Plus they've got that incredible, fire hose of data that they collect every day. And so I'm a little concerned, to tell you the truth, about especially about the marketing science side of the field, if we can use that term, because I don't think we've got that sort of domination in terms of people and ideas and data anymore. And I think I've learned a lot of that from MSI, because I've been involved with MSI a long time, and I kind of saw the transition over a number of years. And just the talks at MSI conference have gotten much more sophisticated, and I've been extremely impressed with the people in these companies that make the presentations. And I think at MSI we're fortunate to be able to get them together. I think that when we go to academic conferences like the AMA conferences, we talk to each other, all right? When the practitioners go to their conferences, they talk to each other. It's rare when academics and practitioners really talk to each other, which I think is a tragedy, because when I first got into the field in the 1970s, that wasn't the case. You would see a lot of practitioners at the academic conferences. Now you don't see that as much, which I think is too bad.
Yeah. If you look at kind of the next generation of marketing scholars, any advice that you'd give to them, maybe to help them catch up in that regard, or to, I don't know if we'll kind of retake that advantage, but any suggestions as you kind of see what's coming down the pike?
Well, I'm most familiar with what's going on in marketing science. I think what we've seen in marketing science is sort of an arms race in terms of methodologies, and so a lot of the PhD students that we interview today are extremely smart. There's no question that they're smart, they're well trained, but they're looking at uninteresting questions, I think, a lot of them, and I think the focus is much more on the methods and less on the question that's being asked. And I wish it was otherwise. I wish we could have an influence on that, but the market is kind of demanding that people come out, super trained, and I understand that. But what I hope is that as they sort of get into their careers, hopefully get some success as publishing, they can start looking more at solving interesting, look at the problem, and less at the kind of the methodologies and making sure it's an interesting problem and they're solving it with good enough methodologies. And I know I'm not the only one in the field. I know there are others like Don Lehman and others that are saying the same thing, that I think that we've gone too far in this sort of methodology arms race. And I have to say, I don't think consumer behavior is immune from this. I think if you read the Journal of Consumer Research, I think the papers have become less interesting over the years. And I was an associate editor at JCR back in the 90s, and I think the arms race there is very different. I think there, every paper has to have 5 or 6 studies, with a main effect and a bunch of interaction effects and mediators and moderators. And by the time you get to the end of the paper, you're sort of exhausted, right? And so I think it's not just marketing scientists that are at fault of that. And so, in terms of advice, I hesitate to give advice. When the students go to the doctoral consortium, they're getting advice from everywhere. But, overall, I think, and one thing I learned from Rick Stalen and in graduate school and Don Lehman was what's important is the problem that you're looking at, okay? And I mean, look at your dissertation, for example. You didn't use the most sophisticated methods, right? And looking at retention, right? And it was just an interesting problem. We happened to get some good data, and you use the appropriate methods. And I think we need more of that. But reviewers at journals and advisors keep pushing and pushing and pushing for more sophistication. And I wish that wasn't true, but unfortunately that's the way of life.
I like that notion, though. It's almost like the freedom to focus on interesting problems, right? I think that's something we could come to. So, in addition to all this wonderful research impact you've had, you've also had several academic leadership roles, and I think that's rare in many ways in marketing. Most recently as Dean, Department of Business Administration at NYU. So how have business students, and particularly marketing-focused business students, changed? Mm-hmm. And how should business schools be working with business to prepare tomorrow's workforce?
Well, first of all, I've always taken all the 3 dimensions that we're evaluated on, teaching, research, and service seriously. All right, I think, as you have as well, and I'm not the only one in the field. There are a lot of the people being interviewed in this series have done the same thing. And to tell you the truth, I've always felt, maybe privileged isn't the right word, but I've always felt this is the best career you could have, mm-hmm. because of the kind of the personal freedom you have to do what you want, and the kind of the variety of activities, right? So, we're trained to do research, but I think most people enjoy teaching not just because they're in the classroom, but it's a break from research, right? It's sort of something specific you have to do, right? Prepare a case, prepare lecture notes, whereas research is kind of open-ended. And also, I found service activities to be enjoyable as well. So I've always been involved with service activity. Even when I was an assistant professor at Columbia, I was the junior faculty representative to the University Senate, which is interesting. Then at Vanderbilt, I was in charge of the doctoral program when we started it. And then at Berkeley, I was hired to be the group chair. We didn't have departments. And I was the associate dean for faculty twice. And I just enjoyed being involved with the institution and universities wherever I've been because, I find the industry we're in to be really interesting. It's got a lot of interesting people, right? Many of whom would not survive in the real world, and they could only be successful as academics. And you'll learn a lot because in graduate school you don't take any seminars or courses on how to be a manager, right? So I've had to sort of fire people, hire people, and nobody trained me to do that. So you learn a lot, and And I've always taken the serious, service part seriously, and I've enjoyed those service aspects. When I was deputy dean at Stern and department chair for 6 years, and to tell you the truth, I was thinking about it the other day. This year, I stepped down as department chair year before. I was on sabbatical last year. This is the first year since I was at Berkeley. I started there in 1988, so that is 28 years ago, that I haven't had an administrative assignment.
You've just been a regular faculty member.
Just a regular old Joe, you know.
Wow,
And
yeah.
I would say it's not so bad for a little while, but I'm sure at some point I'll want to do something. So, you know, I'm not editing a journal. I'm not a senior editor. I was the senior editor at Marketing Science. I'm not doing that. So, you know, I don't know how long I'll like it, but I really do enjoy being involved with the university. You know, I think it's, as I said, it's really enjoyable, and I really like the service component. And I know there are a lot of people in the field that don't focus on that as much, find it to be drudgery, but you know, I find all three activities to be interesting and complementary in some ways.
Well, when you were talking about that, I was remembering when you were the associate dean at Berkeley, and one of the things that struck me then was you have an ability to be absolutely focused on the person you're talking to at that moment in time. And I thought, okay, I'm just this little doctoral student, and here you are, the dean and the department chair, and I've seen it at conferences. So it makes me think, like, how do you manage your time? How do you kind of manage your time and attention, because you focus so much and give so much to your research, your teaching, you mentor many people, right, directly and indirectly. Do you have a calendar?
I have to say that I have become extremely efficient. All right, I think the time that I was most stressed was when I was the deputy dean at Stern. This was around 2005. I was the vice president for publications for the AMA, and Dick Whitting died. And the thing about journals is that they keep on going, okay? Papers keep coming in, have to be assigned reviewers. Papers with reviews keep coming in, have to be, and so it's a continuous process. You know, you've been an editor. And I felt at the time that we couldn't go through an editor search. So I stepped in, became the editor. And I was the deputy dean of the school, and I was editor at JMR for about a year and a half before Joel Huber took over. And I was extremely stressed. But, you know, you become efficient, right? It's like when you have kids, okay? I mean, and you have a full-time job, and our executive MBA students, for example, have full-time jobs, go to school, have families and stuff, and they learn to be very efficient. And I think I've learned to be very efficient, okay? I've never been somebody, frankly, who's had to come into work on weekends. You know, I work weeknights, but not weekends, where I tend to give that to my family. And I'm able to get my work done during the day. I've become efficient at reading papers and spotting what's good and what's bad about them. I have to say I've just become very good with my time, you know, and I think if you have a lot of activities, you have to learn how to do that. And I think the people that spend, 100 hours a week, are just not very good at managing their time, and I think I've been pretty productive without having to burn the midnight oil on Saturdays, So I think, as I said, I'm just a good time manager.
Oh man! But also everything you're doing, you're right there in that moment. I just think that's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, and I've also had outside activities. I mean, for example, I'm president of my synagogue now. I was president of synagogue in California, and I was involved with a not-for-profit arts organization in New York, and just like doing a lot of things. Wow. Yeah, and focus, as you say, focus on that thing I'm doing at that time.
Yeah. As you look to the future of marketing, what particular areas do you see that really need additional study?
Well, I think a really important area that is a problem for chief marketing officers and marketing managers, how to allocate their media money across all the numbers of media that are out there. And we've got so much data now coming in, sort of this, it's cliche, but sort of this big data era. that is difficult to process and coming in from many sources, and just a major problem for marketers to think about, how are they going to make decisions about, how much money to put into, say, search versus social media versus traditional advertising, magazines, radio, all that stuff. It's just, I think, a really interesting issue. We've got people working in pieces of it, so there's a lot of marketing mix modeling going on, and measurement companies like Nielsen and Comscore, Rentrack, looking at set-top box or sort of continuous measures of people getting exposed to media. So it's going to come together in terms of data, but I think that, from the marketing people that I talk to, a lot of the allocation decisions are being made sort of by rules of thumb. Say, well, let's allocate 10% of our dollars to, social media or something like that, as opposed to using any science yet. So I think how to make media decisions in the next few years is a really important decision. It's an important decision now, of course, but I see that as a major issue. And I don't think we know everything there is to know about how people react, how consumers react to these media, how they're using them, how it affects their buying behavior. And so I'm really interested in the whole general area, I think, of media, going forward.
It's really cool. And, you think about that, it really fits with a lot of the work that you've done in your career. So much of your work has focused on consumer choice modeling and consumer buying behavior. Could you offer a brief explanation of consumer choice modeling? I mean, I know that's a really difficult thing, or maybe talk a little bit about how you became interested or engaged with the topic, and how you see businesses applying perhaps some of the work that you've done, and maybe building on that media aspect, how do you see where that whole area of consumer choice modeling might be moving in the future?
My doctoral dissertation used a very interesting set of data called AdTel data, where the company ran 2 cables through a town in the Midwest, and on one cable they might receive different ad copy than on the other cable, or on one cable maybe twice as much advertising than the other cable, where the ad time would be filled in by public service spots. And people that had each cable, some of them would be recruited to fill in their purchases. In those days, it was diaries that they had to write in their purchases. And then they would see, well, did the advertising copy A have any difference than advertising copy B, or did the extra advertising on A have any impact over B? Like a controlled field experiment. And so I developed a consumption model, not a choice model. From there, the methodologies improved. An econometrician named Dan McFadden developed a multinomial logit model, and that became popularized by John Little at MIT and some other people, including Rick Stalen, my thesis advisor. And so the field kind of moved to logit choice models, basically where you get now scanner data that people supply. They have an ID card, and they scan in the ID card, then they scan in their purchases, so you get all the brands and sizes and everything that they bought. And then what we could do is then model brand choice behavior using this multinomial logit model for multiple brands as a function of price and promotion and things like that. And then at some point, we were able to get what's called single source advertising data, where not only did we have their purchase data, but we also had their ad exposure from using Nielsen's home scan and people meters. And so I had a couple papers using single source advertising data. And so, from then I've been interested in advertising for a long time, and did a few other things, not all of which were published. And so I have an interest in advertising on choice. I just find, again, it goes back to an earlier question about combining my interests sort of in modeling and consumer behavior. I'm interested in advertising, but I'm interested in advertising in terms of how it makes people make brand choices. All right. Other people do different kind of research. They do maybe research at an aggregate level using time series data, and looking at long-term effects of advertising like Mike Hansen's might do. I've always been interested in the household, how does advertising, how does price, how do these variables affect what's going on at the household decision level. So it's this movement into brand choice modeling really is very consistent with my interest in combining both consumer behavior and modeling, and fortunately we can do that.
So if you were starting today, do you think you'd be drawn to all the mobile data and in-store beacons and, think about what's available in terms of what we might call, individual transaction level measurements. Do you think you'd really be drawn to developing models?
There's no doubt. If I was doing a dissertation today, I would definitely be involved with that kind of research. I think as you move through your career, generally the people that are doing the most sophisticated stuff are the newest and the youngest, students in the marketplace. So I would say that I'm not, I'm not at the leading edge anymore in terms of methodology. Some of the papers I've done in the last few years have been more, I would say interdisciplinary, maybe bigger picture kinds of things. For example, I was involved with the Advertising Research Foundation project looking at a blend of neuromarketing with market response modeling, and that was published in a JMR issue that came out recently on neuromarketing. And
I'd say that's pretty cutting edge.
Yeah, that was pretty cutting edge. I didn't do the fMRI, but we had a team at Temple University did that. But it's sort of, again, very consistent with my interests in sort of relating advertising to consumer behavior. Sort of the marketing mix modeling was kind of standard. But the stuff that people are doing today, they're writing these computer programs and scraping data off the web and like doing very sophisticated supply demand side modeling. I can read it, I can understand it. I don't know if I could do it if I wanted to. And it's not my competitive advantage anymore anyway. There's not any point in me doing it. There are better people doing it, so I'm trying to focus my energies elsewhere.
Kind of given your interest in consumer behavior, and now we've discussed your career path, we're going to move to something a tad bit more unconventional. We're going to ask you 5 fast questions that allow us to discover a little bit more about you. You ready?
I don't know.
Okay. So what's the last movie you saw, and was it good or bad?
The last movie I saw was a movie called Son of Saul, which is a extremely harrowing movie that takes place inside a concentration camp during World War II. Very depressing, independent movie, which is actually a candidate for the best foreign film of 2016, which is coming up Sunday night.
Was it well done then, even though it was
amazing, just amazing? It was shot like inside of the concentration camp, and first-time director, first-time actor. Yeah. And I'm a big independent film fan. I'm a big film fan, and it's just an amazing film, and it just makes you think a lot. It's really harrowing.
Wow. So, have you ever fantasized about being in a rock band? And if so, what would your group be called?
Have I ever fantasized about being in a rock band? I was in a rock band.
Oh, okay. I should have known
I was
that.
in a rock band when I was in high school.
Yeah?
I was. I played the keyboards. And we played for all the local high school parties and a few fraternity parties. And it was great.
What was the name
I had
of your
a groupie.
What was the name of your band?
She became my wife.
Look, okay.
The name of the band was called The Night Watch.
The Night Watch.
And
so your groupie became your wife.
Yeah, we were going together before that, but it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun, and we never became rich or famous, but we earned enough money so I could take my future wife out on dates, and we could afford to do things. So I was in a rock band. Wow. Do I ever fantasize about being in a better one? Yeah. I'm an aging rock and roller. That's the truth.
And what about travel? What's your favorite place to travel?
That is an interesting question. Last year I was fortunate to be on sabbatical in Singapore and did a lot of traveling there. And I don't really have a favorite place. I think I do love a region. I do love Southeast Asia. And we went to like Myanmar and Sri Lanka. And we've been to every ASEAN country, which is the trade association in the region, except for the Philippines and Brunei. So we're going to try to fix that at some point. So, but I think if I had to be put on the spot, my favorite country to visit is India. And I've been fortunate to be able to visit India a good number of times and teach there. And I just love the people, love the color, love the sounds, the smells. It's a tough place to visit for some people, but I love it. I love it, yeah.
So here's another one. Have you ever fantasized about changing your first name? And if so, to what?
Wow. That's a hard one. That is a hard one. The answer is I've never fantasized about changing my first name. But if I did, I would use my middle name, which is Stewart. I don't know how I got Russell. I asked my mother that because I'm Jewish and it's not a particularly Jewish name. And she never could answer it. She just said, we like the name, you know? Okay. But if I had to change it, I guess I'd use my middle name.
So, and the last one is, I have to ask you, why did you take a flyer on a person like me who didn't look like a typical doctoral student when you were at Berkeley?
That's a hard question. You know what? I think a lot of successful doctoral student professor relationships are based on just good old getting along well, you know? And I think the two people have to feel comfortable with each other. And it's not so much a matter of, do I think you're smart enough? I knew you were smart enough. Or did I think you could, you know, complete all the work? I just thought we had a good rapport. And I think the most successful interactions I've had with students are because, you know, the student never felt, you know, shy about barging into my office with something, or I never felt, you know, reluctant to ask the student to do something extra or something different. And, you know, it's like a lot of things. It's based on personal relationships, and that's why I thought we were productive together.
Well, I would agree. And I have to tell you, there were moments when I didn't think I was going to be capable of the work in that first year, but,
you know what?
I survived.
I'll be honest with you. My second year in graduate school, I gave serious thoughts to dropping out. And it was just tough. You know, it was very tough. And I thought that, you know, I was, relative to the other students that were at Carnegie at the time, you know, just not smart enough. I was having trouble coming up with ideas like all students do. And I can remember telling my wife Toby that, you know, I don't know if I can do this, you know, I really don't. And I think, you know, that's when you sort of lean on your advisors, right? And as I said earlier in the interview, I just had some good people, you know. I had Rick, I had Andy, another guy, Tim McGuire, you know, who was on the faculty at the time, not in marketing. And, you know, I hope you felt the same way, that, you know, well, even if at times were rough, and it happens to every doctoral student, that, you know, you've got some help there, right? And if you've got a good relationship, it'll pull through. If you don't, you may not. And a lot of doctoral students, as you know, don't finish the program and aren't successful. And I think you need that interpersonal relationship to pull through. And a good student makes a professor more productive too. And so I think we like good students like you. And we were also lucky to get that great data set, right?
Well, yeah, we really were.
That interactive TV data set.
Yeah, we were. What goes around comes around. Yeah. But I have to say, I was honored. I was talking to someone this morning and I said, you know, I was the luckiest person in the world to land at Berkeley and to have you as my advisor. So I'm just honored to have had the opportunity to work with you, and honored to be the one to interview you for this very cool AMA Legends
series.
I'm
really pleased that you were chosen to do it. And as I said, I'm really proud of your accomplishments as well. So Yeah, we can be proud of each other. Right?
We can. Let's do that. So
We'll start a mutual admiration society of two.
Yes. On that note, on behalf of the American Marketing Association and the Marketing Legends interview series, I'm Kay Lemon. Thank you for joining us.